Well, I was going to open by saying bonjour, comment ça va? But that would be my extent of French. Yeah, yeah. That we'll put it up there. My presentation was a bit more tailored to the apple orchard industry for 2 days ago, so I apologize. But it does have some good slides we're going to kind of walk through in a few minutes. I'm one of the newest members of the Agro-K team. I've spent the last 26 years of my life working in the fertilizer industry up in British Columbia, Canada. So a little bit north of here. Not a whole lot different as far as winter goes. We get the area I live in is semi-arid. Worked in a number of different crops, from orchards and vineyards to what I call small fruits, blueberries, both high bush and low bush. And low bush is, yes, a lot different than a high bush blueberry. So blueberries, raspberries, strawberries, and cranberries. So that's where my strength lies. I've been 26 years, like I said, in the fertilizer industry, working with the Agro-K product line for the last 8 years as a distributor in the field, working with growers like yourself. And last year, having worked with the Agro-K line as long as I did, solid line, and I was offered a job and came on board with Agro-K to work with them and build the line right across Canada. So I'm now the new Canadian Business Development Manager for Agro-K. I have the distinct pleasure, Del, most of you know Del, I understand. Del has been traveling out to Nova Scotia on a regular basis there a couple times a year, so I'm helping him transition that business over to a local distributorship out there so he can spend more time in the agronomy when he's traveling out to Nova Scotia and less time worrying about how the product's going to get there. I can take care of that with the distributor side. So I've had the distinct pleasure of doing some work with Del. Interesting listening to your SWD problems. We're not alone. You guys have a problem too. And it's a big one. There's a lot of trapping, a lot of monitoring going on out there in British Columbia for SWD. But growers are still being very proactive. They're not allowing, by the time you start picking up SWD on those traps, you should have already been spraying. So we're, like you, on a very proactive, preventative program with SWD, and just kind of utilizing the traps at this point in time to give us an idea of load and pressure, but certainly not dictating when we're spraying. We're being very proactive and being out there in a preventative spray schedule. Unfortunately, however, we don't have all the wonderful chemicals you have down here. You've got some pretty neat chemistry down here that hasn't been registered in Canada. We make the California registration process look real easy. So for today, Del asked me to come up and talk a little bit about spraying. I'm probably going to cover a lot of stuff that you might figure is, at least I hope you'll figure, is kind of like 101 for spraying techniques and things to keep in mind. A lot of the stuff that I'm going to cover, I'm hoping you'll find is just a nice reminder, just to check before you get into the season and into the heat of the battle of the day, things that I want you to be keeping in mind as you're going out there and you're doing your sprays. So I'm going to cover 3 topics today. I'm going to talk a little bit about chemical hydrolysis. Primarily, I understand your water is fairly alkaline. The water where I come from is also fairly alkaline. I typically have hard water where I live. Hard water, by definition, has a whole lot of calcium in it. I also have high pH water. The water pH in the area where I live, anywhere from 7.8 to 8.3, and I think that's fairly similar to what most of you are working with, from my understanding. So from that side of the spectrum, we're not a whole lot different. So alkaline hydrolysis is something you need to be keeping in mind, so I'm going to be talking about that. Things to keep in mind in the general terms, I'm going to talk about the order when you're doing more sophisticated tank mixes. I'm going to talk about the order in which certain things go into the tank. It's a little bit important that we do things in the right format, don't try and jump the gun on things. And then I'm going to finish off talking for a very few minutes about spray volumes. I got into that in a lot more detail with the apples because, of course, there's bigger trees and a whole bunch of comments and thoughts about adjusting spray rates on the trees based on the size of the trees. But I am going to touch base on this from a small fruits perspective, give you the Canadian side and what we're doing in raspberries and strawberries as far as water volumes. If you can pick something new out of that, great. So, chemical hydrolysis. What the heck is chemical hydrolysis? It's the breakdown of the pesticide because of the water in the spray tank. The water in the spray tank can actually cause that pesticide to break down and turn into inert ingredients. In other words, break it down to the point where it doesn't work anymore. So the pH of the water in your tank is very important. Yes, a lot of the new chemistries coming on the market today are pH stable at a range of pHs from 4.0 all the way up to 7 and 8. But you know what? They're not all there. You need to be paying attention to this. If you're buying a product and you're going to be mixing it, you need to know the stability of that chemical before you put it into the tank. And if you don't know, ask your chemical rep. This is information that they have. It actually should be on the label, although I've read some American and Canadian labels that don't have it on the label. And you may have to seek out your supplier and say, what's the pH stability of this product? What's the pH of the water in your spray tank? You should know what that pH is, and you should be monitoring that pH, not just in the springtime, but through the course of the season. pH of the water can change radically as you go through your grow season. So spend the money, get a little pocket pH meter. They're not overly expensive, and check that pH of your water in your spray tank on a regular basis. Remember, these pesticides have the potential to break down if the pH isn't right for them, and you're spending money on these pesticides. You've invested in these pesticides. Kind of already covered that, so we're going to keep moving through. There we go, come on, there we go. So, know the pH of your water, buffer it accordingly. Good example in this case is when I was working with a farmer, I had a case where I sold him some malathion. He went out and applied the malathion and gave me a shout and told me that I sold him water. I didn't sell him he said, the chemical must have froze over the winter or something, it's crap, it didn't work. Through the investigation process, we looked at what his pH was, talked to him, he filled up the tank, he got ready to go spraying at 11:30, looked at his watch, it's 11:30, this tank's going to take me a while to empty, you know what, I'm going to grab a bite to eat in the house first. He went into the house, grabbed a bite to eat. The phone rang, it's the busy season, things are happening, and took a few phone calls, did a few emails, lost track of time. A couple hours later, he got out there. The back of the patch was at least a good half hour, 45-minute ride from the house. Well, with the pH he had, over that 3-hour time span, the chemical broke down, the malathion broke down to the point where by the time he got to the backfield, he was probably spraying about 70% inert ingredients. So he had about a 30% AI on a product that's not cheap. So know the pH of your water, pay attention to it, and buffer it accordingly. Glyphosate. In my neck of the woods, when I first moved from the Fraser Valley, coastal BC, into the interior of BC about 20-odd years ago, the growers told me glyphosate doesn't work. It's crap. Doesn't work up here. Well, we have very hard water, and we have very high pH water, and it was actually neutralizing the glyphosate. So we started acidifying the water. Do you have LI 700 down here? Yeah. Great acidifying, great buffer, brought the pH down, and voila, all of a sudden Roundup works. Little side rabbit trail on that front. If you have generics down here, things like Credit and other generics coming out of China, they are uniquely different than the touchdowns and the Roundups. The Roundups and the touchdowns have spreader stickers and do have some buffering agents already added to them. I haven't seen a generic yet that does. So they're cheaper, but there's a reason they're a little cheaper. So if you're buying a generic, you're going to need to pay a little bit more attention in what you're adding to the tank to ensure that that generic is going to work as well as you want it to. If you're tank mixing, you're checking your pH of your water when you start, please check the pH of your water once everything is also in the tank. You're using a lot of different products that can impact the pH in that tank. You've got your system series, if nothing else, you've got your system series Agro-K products, which are phosphites. They're acidic by nature. It's not a strong acid, it's a weak acid, but it's a low pH acid. The average phosphite is in that 2.5 to 2.8 range. It's going to have an impact in that spray tank when you put it in. So monitor your spray for your pH after the chemicals all go in. Check to make sure that it's where you want it to be, and if you need to buffer it again, buffer it again. pH can be a little bit funny. You can do your buffering, and you put in some buffer, and you're trying to get her to move down. Let's say you're at 7.8, and you're trying to bring her down to 6. You put a little bit in, you put a lot in, and he's gone from 7.8 to 7.5 to 7.4, and it's not really moving a whole lot. Then all of a sudden, you're going to hit that wall when you're buffering, whether it's with whatever acid, and it's going to collapse. So when you do your buffering, go slowly, add small increments on a regular basis, regularly, and then check, a little bit more, and then check, because you're going to hit that wall, and all of a sudden, 7.8, 7.7, 7.6, 7.5, 6.2. All of a sudden, you're going to get that wall, and it's going to collapse. So you want to be safe until you get to understand your water quality. And where that wall is depends on your water quality and the buffer capacity of your water to hold on to that pH. Here's some examples of some ideal pHs for some of the chemistry we have in Canada. Like I said, you guys have a whole lot more chemistry down here that I'm not familiar with. We don't have the fortunate of having a lot of that stuff. But I do believe in the small fruit industry, you're using a lot of Cap 10 down here. Take a look at Cap 10. The ideal pH of Cap 10 is 5. Pretty low. It is, isn't it? Yeah.
I use that. Ours is 7.
Yeah, 7.
We have rural water and they control it, it's 7.
7. So when it's in the spray tank, it's good to put something in there to bring that pH, whether it's battery acid, whatever it is, it's good to put something in there to bring that pH down a little bit for the Cap 10. And that is a scary one. Roundup, 3.5 to 4. Now, there's a little bit of a debate about with the Roundup, whether it's true alkaline hydrolysis that's taken place. Roundup, the glyphosate molecule is a very strong chelation agent. So there's some debate whether it's actually the Roundup breaking down or whether it's actually being tied up with the calcium that's in the water, which will be really readily available at that higher pH. But it's still 3.5 to 4 is what Roundup's looking for. It's looking for that acidic pH. Bravo, not too bad. You're going to be right on the. You're going to be for Roverall. Sorry, you're going to be right on the game though. 7. So, and Nova, a good example of a newer fungicide that's relatively stable. You can be at a pH of 4 to a pH of 9 on Nova, and you're going to be fine. You don't need to worry about it. But you should know that you don't need to worry about it. That's why you want to ask the stability from your chemical manufacturer. Don't guess. All these products cost money. They're an investment. You're using them for a reason. You don't need to guess. Ask. Here's some of them breaking down. And it can be a big shift because the pH scale is logarithmic, right? There's a big change between a pH of 8, pH of 9, and a pH of 7 because it's logarithmic. It's not just one movement. Look at malathion from a pH of 8, 19 hours for a half-life. So half that malathion is going to be gone in 19 hours. pH 9, you've got 5 hours. So some big differences. Cap 10, pH of 8, 10 minutes, half-life. If you can buffer that down to pH 7, so where you're at, sir, at least you're getting 8 hours out of it, but you're still losing a percentage for every hour. So if you can even get it a little bit lower, even down to 6, you're getting that much more active ingredient that you're buying onto the crop instead of losing it to the breakdown. So, just some key statements on this part before we leave and talk a little bit about spray volumes and do's and don'ts when doing tank mixes. The products we're spraying, whether they're fertilizers or chemistry, they're not cheap. They cost money. You've invested in them. You're spraying them for a reason. It's not just because you've got nothing to do and you want to go ride your tractor around the patch. So you want to make sure that those products are working, that you're getting your most bang for your buck, your return on investment. It's all about dollars, right? So take the time, slow down. Don't go down the field with your sprayer at 4.5, 5 miles per hour. Slow down. I tell my farmers when you're out spraying, 2 to 2.5 miles per hour is about right. Make sure you're getting good coverage. We're talking about water volumes in a little bit. But take the time, do it right. And when you're doing tank mixes, remember, dilution is our friend. There are certain ingredients that get along great when they're in dilution together, but when they're in a more concentrate state together, they don't get along so good. And so here's a few things. Now let's talk about things to keep in mind when we're spraying. First of all, calibrate your sprayer and calibrate it as regularly as you can. I know it can be very tedious, particularly depending on the sprayer you've got. We've got some raspberry growers in the BC, in the Fraser Valley, that are actually using air blast sprayers versus the conventional booms. Air blast sprayers tend to be a little bit more cumbersome to calibrate. You're definitely going to get wet. So clean and water, obviously. But please calibrate your sprayer, and don't just do it at the beginning of the season. A lot of the farmers I work with in Canada, at the beginning of the year, they buy a whole new set of nozzles. They're not worrying about those nozzles. Those nozzles are relatively cheap in comparative to the chemistry that's going into the tank and the crop that they're getting off. So once a year, at the beginning of each year, they'll invest in a whole new set of nozzles. So they're not worried, because a lot of these products can, particularly some of the chemistry, can actually be quite wearing on those nozzles. So something for you to think about. I specifically used the picture on the right to give you an example of what can happen in the tank with a lack of dilution or hard water. That picture on the left is, pardon me, I don't know ounces. That's about 100 milliliters of water. So I don't know, how many ounces would that be roughly, Del? 2 or 3? More than that. 3.7, so about 4 ounces of water and 2 drops of 1034O. It was clear the 1034O, 2 drops went in there. The water is hard water. It's got high calcium, hard water, high pH, 7.8. It's local water in my area. 1034O has phosphorus in it. We're forming a precipitate called calcium phosphate. It's a solid. Solids tend not to move into the plant very well. They're either going to sit on the leaf or they're going to sit in the soil, but even in the soil, it's got to go into solution to get through that root membrane. That's lost phosphorus. So if that was hard water with 1034O and he didn't do something to address that, guess what? He just wasted all his phosphorus, or a good chunk of it anyways. It's just not going to go anywhere. It's going to be in a precipitate. So know the quality of your water. Beyond just the pH, water test. Do a water test. Find out how much calcium's in your water. Take a look at it. It's worth it. How much organic matter? Roundup. If you're spraying Roundup and you have dirty water, Roundup is neutralized with organic matter. So if you've got organic matter in the form of silt and sand and clay floating in your dirty water that you can't see through it, as soon as you throw the Roundup in, it's being neutralized by the water that you want to spray with. Clean water, and know the quality. So, we're using clean water, we know the quality, we're kind of keeping that all in mind. As we're starting to get ready to throw things into the tank, please, and I know this is way easier for me to say standing up here today than it is for you in the heat of the battle when things are all breaking apart and things are going fast at 200 miles an hour, but start with this clean spray tank. If there's a little bit of Bravo on the bottom of that tank and I want to put something else out and do a spray, it matters. Start with a clean tank. Matter of fact, I would encourage you at the end of the spray, before you put the sprayer away for the day, that's the time to clean it. Don't let it sit and gunk at the bottom of the sprayer. Clean it out at the end of the spray so it's ready to go for the next one. And I know that's easy to say, but I've been on your side in a raspberry patch, and you get busy and you're trying to spray early in the morning, and you show up at the farm at 4:30 or 5 o'clock to start your spray, and the tank ain't clean. I'm going to be real hesitant to clean it, but you need to. Start with a clean tank. Before you put anything else in the tank, pre-fill it. I tell my farmers 2/3 full of water before anything goes in, at least half full. But I tell guys at least 2/3 full with water before anything else goes into the tank. Now, first products that are going to be in the tank, acid-based. So if you've got a phosphite, System Series products, they're acid-based products. This is the time that those acid-based products are going to go in the tank. And as these products are going in the tank, start the tractor, get the agitation going. And you want to keep that agitation going from this point forward until the tank's empty. Next, your micronutrients. Your Dextrolac products. So if you're putting in some Dextrolac, some manganese DL or whatever, copper DL, zinc DL, this is when the micronutrients go in. So the Dextrolac products would go in next. Now, one little odd thing I don't have on the slide here, but kind of the oddball on this is boron. if you're using a pesticide that's going to go in the tank later, because I haven't talked about pesticides yet, but if the pesticide that's going in the tank later is a Solupac, boron and Solupacs don't get along very well. So it's that dilution is our friend. So if you know that the pesticide later is going to go in, there's going to be a Solupac, don't put the boron on yet. You want to put that Solupac in first. Boron's way at the tail end once that entire Solupac has been dissolved. Otherwise, it's not going to go well. You're going to get gum in your tank, and you're not going to like things very much. So that's kind of the one exception. Solupac and boron don't get along very well. So hold off if you're going to hold off with any boron in the tank if you're going to do a Solupac. The next thing into the tank are the organics. So if you're doing a kelp-based material like SimSpray 20X, this is the time that those products go into the tank. So any organic-based materials. Keep agitating. Keep agitating. The tank hasn't been sprayed out yet. So once those first materials go in, you keep agitating until you're done. Now, at this stage of the game, fill up a whole bunch more water. Go right almost to the top. We've got a few more ingredients that still have to go in yet, so we're not completely full, but we're almost completely full. So fill it almost all the way up. And at that point, now we're going to put in our NPK fertilizers. So if you got some 3-18-18, some 0-20-26, whatever you've got going in there, this would be the time to put it in. KDL. And then finally at the very end, now your chemistry's going. If you've got a pesticide that's going into the tank, this is the point where that pesticide can now go into the tank. Now with the boron and the Solupacs, you'd put your Solupac in at this point. Wait till the entire Solupac is completely dissolved. I can't overemphasize that because otherwise I'm going to want to take my contact information off that first slide so you can't call me because you're not going to be happy. Wait till that complete Solupac is dissolved. And then if you're putting a boron into the tank, a boric acid 10% or something, that's when it goes in. So that's the one exception. Caution when mixing the Agro-K phosphates. We've talked about that. They are a lower pH product. You want to be really sensitive with copper products, and that's copper pesticide products. I'm not referring to the copper DLs. I'm thinking things like copper spray, copper oxychloride. That's something you have down here. I think you're spraying regularly. You want to be cautious with those type of products with the phosphates. The low pH and the copper oxychloride don't go along too good. There's other products, however, where the phosphates are a synergy. They like them to be more acidic. But you want to be aware that when you're going in, careful with the phosphates. They're a bit of a unique product to work with. Avoid mixing, I know this one's an obvious one, but I do see it all the time. Avoid pre-mixing products before you pour them in the tank. Pour them in the tank. That's where you want them. Pour them in as liquids into the tank. Now, up in my neck of the woods, we use a lot of water-soluble fertilizers, so I see a lot of things like 20-20, 10-52-10, those type of products. And I see a lot of growers using the screen at the top of the sprayer as the dissolve point for those products. No, please don't. Unless that's the only product in the tank, pre-dissolve it in a bucket of water first. I know that's an added step, it's added work, but it's going to save you some grief. Even if you don't get a complete dropout of products in the tank, you could still be affecting the chemistry and not maximizing your return on your investment for what's in the tank by not doing this. So no, the screen at the top of the tank is not the place to dissolve your water-soluble fertilizer as it's going into the tank. Do not spray in the heat of the day. I don't think anybody would be doing that anyways. The morning or the evening are the times to be out there spraying, regardless of what's in the tank usually. We don't want to be doing any burn or phyto problems. I prefer the morning hours to go out, and I'm concerned about leaf wetness. If you go out early in the morning, then as the sun comes up, the spray can gradually dry. If you're going on late in the evening, that leaf is going to be wet all night and right through till the next morning until the sun comes up. And a lot of the diseases, once you get beyond 10 to 12 hours of leaf wetness, you've just created an incubation period. So I like to try to keep that under 10 to 12 hours of leaf wetness. So if you can, spray in the early hours of the morning, but certainly the evening's better than mid-afternoon in the heat of the day. 3 to 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a sunny day, yes, worst time to spray. Don't go out at that point. That's the heat of the day. Like I said, more common sense type things, just a reminder as we're coming into the season. Try to spray on dry leaves, not wet leaves. Wet leaves add a whole new random dynamic to the scenario, and you just put a whole bunch of money and effort, and you're going to be putting a whole bunch of time spraying this stuff. You don't want your leaves wet when you're going out and spraying. I've also seen phyto concerns with fertilizer congregating into those water droplets. They'll pull them in and collect the fertilizer into that part of the leaf and do burn. So certainly, yes, Del.
There's only one exception to that, and that's if you're fighting cyclamen mite, where you're trying to get down into the canopy of the strawberry plant.
Very good point.
But that's, you're right on.
Other than that, yeah. There's always the exception. Nothing is black and white, is it, Del? Do not over-apply. Spray to wet. Now, of course, if you're doing a miticide and you're trying to get right in, there are times, but know what you're trying to do. Are you trying to do a foliar spray where you just want to spray so the leaf is wet? And if I'm doing a foliar nutrient spray and I'm spraying to the point of runoff, what's running off? That water that's running off has my fertilizer with it that I just bought and paid for. So know what you're spraying and whether you're trying to do a total saturation, like for a miticide, like Del's saying, where you're trying to get into those crooks or crannies, or if I'm doing a foliar fertilizer, I'm just trying to get that leaf wet. Don't want to waste product. And of course, if there's concerns about tank compatibility, do the jar test. And I think everybody here knows what the jar test is, right? Small amounts of everything into the jar. Of course, wear the proper equipment. Yeah, put on the white moon suit and the gloves, and don't go out there spraying pesticides in your shorts and t-shirt. Not a good idea. You might not be feeling so well. Now, some of this is a little bit more in the orchard, but certainly in the raspberry patch. How many people here, because I do see it at home a little bit, air blast sprayers in the raspberries? Anybody here doing air blast? Or is it, so there's one at the, primarily booms or what you're doing? Am I right? Yeah, yours are air, but everyone else, more of a boom? Yeah? Okay, I'm seeing some nods. So the boom, you're going down every row. If you've got an air blast, you still need to go down every row. Don't try to shortcut. Certainly by cranking the pressure up and trying to blast through that canopy to the next row, doesn't work. You can get into problems. In apples, we actually see rusting on apples. We actually see cell damage because of people trying to do that. It just doesn't work. So down every row, like I said, you've invested in your product, you've invested in the time, you're doing it for a reason. Take the time, do it right, go down every row, get good coverage. Manage your sprayer pressure, manage your tractor speed. If you're going at 5 miles per hour, you're probably going a little too fast. Like I said, most growers up in my neck of the woods, I'm trying to get them to go at 2 to 2.5 miles per hour. So water volumes. The message of the day, don't cut back. This is the one area that I see a lot of farmers wanting to cut back on. I've got a 50-gallon sprayer. I want that 50 gallons to last me an acre. Don't. Invest either in a larger tank or add a little bit more time, and don't try to get that 50-gallon sprayer to go an acre. Typically on small fruits in the Fraser Valley up in British Columbia, I'm telling farmers the average is 70 to 110 gallons an acre, depending on the crop and the foliage we're working with. 70 to 110. I have some guys that will go down to 60, and I'm not overly happy, but it seems to work for them. But once you start going below 60 gallons an acre, you're not going to get the coverage that you're looking for, and the product isn't going to work as well. So minimum 60, preferably, depending on the crop you're working with, 70 to 110 gallons of water per acre is what you need to be at. A lot of the pesticides that are registered in Canada, you have to prove, when a pesticide gets registered in Canada, they've got to prove efficacy. So they've got to prove that that pesticide claim works. They got to, if they're going to claim that this is going to give you 80% control of your mites, they got to prove that it's going to give you 80% control of your mites, and they got to prove with 10 years worth of efficacy trial data to get that done. Most of that work is done at 100 to 110 gallons per acre. And I don't think that's a coincidence that that's the rate they're at. So don't cut corners. Keep your water volumes up. It's the last kind of that last piece of the puzzle. And I think, because most of this is talking orchards, Del, I think we're pretty much at the tail end here. Just going to go through here because most of this was for the other day.
So Rick,
Yep.
what would you say would be the ideal pH for foliar feeding? What should they shoot for?
6.5.
Okay, so you want a little acid?
Little acid, not a lot, just a little bit would be ideal.
And why is that?
Better penetration.
Better penetration, now waxy cuticle, the nutrients will help get through, but when we use the phosphates in there, we're getting, that's just.
Matter of fact, that's one of the big pluses to using the phosphates, particularly if you've got like a blueberry bush or any of that waxy cuticle. That phosphate will help eat up a little bit of that wax and really improve the penetration of that product.
Right.
Matter of fact, even if I'm using, because I don't have all the phosphates up in my neck of the woods that you do, I'll use a phosphate and I'll even put the Dextrolax products in with the phosphate because that will carry those Dextrolax products into the leaf. It won't move it, translocate it once it's in as well as a true phosphate complex, but it does get it in.
Did everyone hear what he said? One more time, repeat that.
Thank you. We don't have micronutrient phosphates like you have down here. You're very fortunate in that regard. I have the macronutrient phosphate. So I've got a calcium phosphate, I've got a magnesium phosphate, and a potassium phosphate. The micronutrient phosphates I don't have. For some strange reason, the Canadian government seems to think they're connected to Foresight Al and to take over the government or something, and they say we can't use them. Go figure. But so what I'll do is I've got the micronutrient Dextrolac products, which are the sugar-based complexes, and I can actually put in, if you put a phosphate into the tank, like a calcium phosphate, and you add, say, manganese on top of that in a Dextrolac form, that phosphate complex will actually carry that manganese Dextrolac, that other micronutrient, into the leaf. Now what happens, however, is if the nutrient, like that calcium phosphate, is in that true complex, it will actually then carry it up and down in the plant. It drops it a little bit as it goes all the way along, but it carries it. It will drop that manganese that's piggybacking after it goes into the leaf. It won't translocate it as well, but at least I'm getting it into the leaf better.
Larry, if you're basically using, if you're organic and you want to, your pH, your water is about 7.4, and you want to basically get it down to 6.4, what would you use?
Vinegar. Apple cider
Put in
vinegar.
just apple cider vinegar?
Yeah.
How about citric acid?
Yeah, that would work too. As long as your certifier agrees, I need to acidify my water and you can do this and this, that's what I would do.
Now the neat thing with this citric acid, it's also going to give you a little bit of a chelation effect, right?
Somewhat?
Chelation effect. It stabilizes the nutrient that's going to be in the tank. So that little added benefit of using citric acid, it's a little bit of a chelation. A lot of our organic fertilizers, if they're chelated, that's what they're using, citric acid. Eric, oh, sorry.
If you're gonna go down from 7.5 down to 6.5, how much vinegar would you use?
Everybody's water is going to be different because the buffer capacity of your water, how hard your water is going to dictate your unique water's ability to resist that pH change. So some waters, for lack of putting it another way, very pure water can change quite rapidly, will need very little. Hard water that has lots of calcium in it, it's not going to change very easy. The only thing I'm going to caution you on, and you can do a water test to tell you whether you got hard water or how hard your water is. The equivalent of calcium carbonate in your water will give you that idea. But when you are adjusting your pH, be careful because what will happen with the pH, it will, like I said, you'll put in a whole bunch of acid and barely move it. And then all of a sudden you put in that little smidge more and you drop it through the floor and it's like, what the heck happened?
So would you use soft water to spray?
Well, if you could, but I mean, conveniently speaking, conveniently speaking,
We have a lot of calcium.
so go slow when you're buffering.
If you're cutting soft water, soften, you're gonna have a high sodium.
Yeah, very good point, yes, which is a problem there. So it's kind of a no-win scenario, isn't it? When you're taking the pH down, the key thing is do it slowly. Add small amounts, check it, add a bit more, and don't get frustrated because all of a sudden it's going to go.
What would you start with? Say you have a 40-gallon sprayer and you're at 7.5, and you just throw a sand house outside of the vinegar in, spraying, or?
the systems products that you will be using will acidify that down to the proper level, no problem.
So don't worry about it.
So what I would do, if I may, Larry, is put your system product in there. It's the first thing going in the tank anyways, and then check your pH.
That's
And if
why
you
the
need to lead a
pH
little bit
meter
more-
is so important. He recommended that. I would say, if you really want to be good at this, you need to check your pH of every spray you make.
I mean, I'll tell guys, you know what, if you don't want to spend the 40 or 50 bucks to buy a pH meter off of Amazon.com or something, get some pool strips at least. They give you some kind of guidance. But I mean, a pH meter is a simple pH meter, 40, 50 bucks. Amazon.com, it's pretty cheap and easy. And it can save you a lot of grief and make sure, it gives you that confidence. I mean, these pesticides aren't cheap. It's not uncommon to have a tank mix worth $200 an acre when you're going out there. Isn't it nice to know that it's working to your best?
And record that pH. You know, everybody keeps records on, okay, I sprayed this in such and such a day, at such and such a time, and it was cloudy, and the tank pH was this. You see, that's part of your record, your experience that you carry through in your operation. Because it's your water, it's your chemicals, it's your sprayer, and you need that record.
And
So
matter of fact-
you look back next year, oh yeah, on May 1st, I sprayed this, and the tank pH was this, and I put these chemicals in, and here's what I got.
I'm afraid that's what I've seen anyways is as much as pH can vary through the course of the year, it's going to give you a pretty good idea. If your pH was 7.4 in April of 2014, the chances of it being close to 7.4 in April 2015 and April 2016 are pretty good. So it gives you that starting point. So every time you're doing a spray, do record that pH that you're starting with so that you have an idea where you're going to begin with.
What about putting in the tank Simbex or molasses or sugar in that?
All those organics are like the third thing going in, yep.
I mean, you could just put them in anytime? You're saying?
What order?
Yeah, order, I mean.
No, remember we said that the acids go in first, then the micronutrients, and then after that we can put the organics in.
So Simbex would qualify as an organic.
Simbex is an organic.
Molasses is organic.
Molasses is an organic as well. I mean, that's the carbon source for the Simbex, right, to kind of activate everything.
When you're adjusting the pH, you want to do that before, with the exception of maybe the phosphates, you want to do before you add anything else to the tank. So plain water, vinegar, get your pH, and I assume that's the number you record before you start adding.
Actually, I would record the pH of the water I'm starting with and the pH of the final solution before I go spray. Those are the two key pieces of information.
Yeah, you want to know what that pH of that spray solution is.
Yeah.
So in
Oh.
the gentleman's example before, the 40-gallon sprayer, say he puts his products in and it's still too high, 40 gallons, you talking a cup of vinegar, a quart of vinegar?
It depends on your specific water. It's hard for me to say. I mean, I would certainly start by, I mean, it can vary so radically. I mean, you a couple cups on a water that it doesn't have a whole lot of calcium carbonate in it, but you could go up to a gallon or two depending on your water quality.
Between measurements, 10 minutes?
Oh, that's a good 5 minutes.
You can get an idea with a jar test too, the same way you would test for
Absolutely.
compatibility. You can take a quart of water that you're going to spray with and just add vinegar by drop and just
Yep.
kind of get an idea.
Yep. Back.
So if you buffer your water in the beginning, you add your chemicals and stuff, your prescription, so to speak,
Boom, boom. You bet.
and your pH goes back up, is that buffering agent would be okay to put back in at the end?
When you're agitating, if everything's in, once everything's in, I give it 5 minutes and check.
So your buffering that you're gonna use to knock that pH back down, that's gonna be okay?
If it does, but after 5 minutes, after everything's in for 5 minutes and it still hasn't started to go down, chances are you're gonna have to put some more buffering in.
Start more buffering?
Yep. But go slow because, like I said, you could be near that wall, and now you've got all your chemistry in the tank. And okay, I'm shooting for 6.5. I'm at 7.5, so I put a little bit. So all that chemistry's in there because I bumped back up a little bit. So I put it, and I'm only at 7.3, 7.2, and I'm getting frustrated. So I'm putting a couple cups in at a go, and now all of a sudden I put a whole gallon in because it's not moving. All of a sudden I'm at 5. I've seen that happen before. This pH, water pH is very finicky. It will go slow, and then all of a sudden it will crash. So the only thing I can really emphasize, I mean, how much, it's going to vary from with your water quality. But regardless of that, go slow. You'll get a good handle on it. I mean, it's as complicated and tedious as it sounds. Once you've done it a few times, you get to understand your water quality and how much it's going to take. So it will get quicker and quicker and quicker the more often you do it. And it won't be so much guesswork. But the first few times, go slow, add small quantities, give it a few minutes, check, get a bit more, give it a few minutes, check, a bit more.
Everyone, Rick has done an excellent job. I want you to emphasize the takeaway though. My takeaway is the pH is important, but the volume of spray is important and the speed you drive. You know, that is so important. And we can't emphasize that enough. One more question and then we're gonna, yes.
We didn't talk about sprayer tips at all.
I did, and I kind of covered over them. I kind of skipped over top of that. You got the T-Jits, you got all the, you got all the different sprayer tips out there. I'm not going to advertise one over the other. Although, like I said earlier, though, most of the growers that I work with, sprayer tips are relatively cheap in comparison to the chemistry going into the tank. So the one thing I will say about the sprayer tips to overemphasize, you know what? Consider buying a new set every year. It's worth it. It's amazing how over the course, if you're doing a lot of sprays, it's amazing, particularly if you got a copper tip. It's amazing how those sprayer tips can wear down over the course of the season and really change the calibration of the tank. And I've seen tips at the end of the season so worn out that you just can't get that tank even properly calibrated. There's just too much variation. So really consider buying a new set of tips every year.
Thank you, Rick.
Thank you very much, Larry.
Just a little commercial. Agro-K, as you know, we had an organic line for a time and then we discontinued it for a lot of different reasons, and now we're reintroducing a new Agro-K line of products. There are 8 products, 1 soil and 6 foliar, and it's called the Clean Line. And as soon as we have them registered in California, we submitted all the paperwork that is necessary. We're just waiting for final approval, and we will then start manufacturing this. I know there are some organic growers and people of some interest in organics, and this organic line will be available. It will be registered in California for your certifiers information, and then also Washington State. Those are the 2 places that we're registering our Clean Line first. So there is a few trifold brochures back there if you're interested in organic. Our next speaker, I'm going to introduce to you. His name is John Kemp. John Kemp is a friend of ours. He wears 2 hats. The one hat is he actually owns his own fertilizer company and does a lot of things similar to what Agro-K does, but he also has the licensing rights to sap analysis, which is a technology that was developed in the Netherlands. And Del and I have been exposed to it about 3 years ago when we started seeing some of our growers using it. And we actually started using it to evaluate cropping, but also to evaluate Agro-K's programs and how effective they are. And so yesterday, we brought all of the Agro-K staff in, and we had a training session with John all day long. He just backed up the whole dump truck and dumped the whole load on us. And so we're still trying to understand that and put that all together. So John is coming to speak to us about this technology that he has used extensively in developing products, but also helping growers. And our intent is to use it with growers that are very interested. We want to start using soil testing, tissue testing, fruitlet testing, and sap analysis. And the sap analysis technology, we feel, will help us fine-tune fertility programs that we're now doing. It will help us to evaluate. Sometimes we have growers that come with a problem. They say, you know, I'm doing this, and nothing seems to be working. What's going on? John is going to explain to us this technology and then the relationships. And I think when we talk about a total program, soils, foliars, all things affect each other. And sometimes just the small amounts of some nutrients impact a fertility plan in a dramatic way. So John Kemp, if you'd come, and we'll turn the rest of the morning over to you, and you can go until we treat you like this, and that means lunchtime. Okay? All right, John.
All right. Thank you, Larry. That's the first time I've had the dump truck analogy used in reference to myself, but... Well, greetings, friends, including the many friends that I haven't met yet. Thank you for that introduction, Larry. There are, in preparation for the discussion today, there are a number of different pieces that Del and Larry asked me to talk about. Particularly, they asked me to talk about the use of plant sap analysis and how we have been using that over the course of the last several years in working with high-value fruit and vegetable crops and broadacre crops as well. Just to provide a very brief background, I'm going to kind of offer an introduction of our consulting company, Advancing Eco-Agriculture, and kind of a reference for how we think about plant nutrition, because we work with very high-value fruit and vegetable crops, and we think very differently about how to manage plants. And in particular, we think differently in three key regards. One is we think very differently about how to manage disease and insect pests. We have become known for helping farmers manage and actually completely prevent disease and insects by managing nutrition. Secondly, we think very differently about how to manage fruit quality and how to improve fruit quality. And third, we think very differently about how to increase yields. So I wanted to give kind of an overview of those three different sections, and also talk about sap analysis within the context of managing nutrition to accomplish those three objectives. Perhaps to begin, I'd like to share kind of a brief background, personal story of how I got to be doing the work that I'm doing today, and what really the genesis was for all of this. But before I jump into that, I would like to offer some additional comments to Rick's amazing presentation this morning. Really good presentation, Rick. I really enjoyed that. And I would just like to add to that. I would just like to reiterate and emphasize what Rick said, and I'm going to be even stronger than Rick's recommendations. Every year in late October, early November, we sit down with our entire consulting team at AEA, and we evaluate all the growers that we're working with. And we ask the question, how successful is this grower being? How much opportunity is left on the table, and where? And then when we look at these growers and these farmers, we look at what are the commonalities between the farmers that are the most successful, and what are the commonalities among the farmers that are not having the success that they should be having. And this has been a really powerful exercise. Several years ago, in 2013, there was one very pronounced similarity that stood out among all the farmers that were not having the success that they should be having. That was using poor quality water for foliar applications. So that led us to do a lot of research, a lot of additional research to what we had been doing, had done up to that point on water quality for foliar sprays. So I have a question for you. If you were able to reduce the cost of all your foliar fertilizers and all of your insecticides and fungicides by 30% per year, how much would that be worth to you each year? Think about that for just a moment. That, if you have poor quality water, your water quality is affecting the performance of the products that you're applying by at least 30%, and quite possibly substantially more. So we have two rules of thumb. When we start working with a farmer, we simply refuse to work with a farmer very closely unless we do a water quality analysis at a laboratory for his foliar spray water. And then we're able to do the calculations to predict exactly how much apple cider vinegar or whatever form of acid he needs to add to buffer out the minerals that are contained in his water. Just as a general rule of thumb, If your water is less than 5 grains of hardness per gallon or less than 70 parts per million, you don't really need to be too concerned about it. Between 5 and 10 grains of hardness, or between 70 and 150 parts per million, you need to start paying really close attention, and you need to start adding acid buffers to the tank. Above 10 grains per gallon or above 150 parts per million, you have to treat your water. You should not use such hard water for foliar applications. So, what are the solutions? Rick talked about a number of different solutions of acid treatments. I don't really have anything to add to that discussion, but to take it one step further, one step beyond that, when we have more than 10 grains or more than 150 parts per million of water hardness, then we strongly recommend that farmers use reverse osmosis water. Now you think about, well, reverse osmosis unit is an expensive unit. They cost anywhere from, depending on the size that you get, anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 per unit. So they're very expensive. However, every single time that we start working with a farmer, when they install a reverse osmosis unit, they're able to reduce the application rates of whatever it is that they're putting into the tank. It can be a fertilizer, it can be a pesticide, a fungicide, whatever the case might be. You can reduce it by a minimum of 30% and get the exact same results. This holds true for fungicides and insecticides, but if you're using herbicides with reverse osmosis water, you do need to test it and you do need to measure it, because it makes herbicides extremely potent, and herbicides that prior up to that point did not have a negative effect can now have a negative effect on the crop that they're being applied on. You may need to reduce herbicide application rates by as much as 70 to 80%. It's huge. It's a huge, huge difference. And that initial capital cost, when you look at that reduced input cost over the course of several years, that initial capital cost for a reverse osmosis system all of a sudden becomes really inexpensive if you're producing high-value fruit and vegetable crops. So I just wanted to emphasize that. That was a really great point that Rick made, and I just am in complete agreement with what he was sharing.